Brainpower, initiative, and vision are the backbone of entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is the backbone of the economy. Committed intellectual persistence coupled with a desire to meet the needs of society can and does change the world. Entrepreneurs create ideas that become companies, that become jobs, economic activity, and taxes. Canadian entrepreneurs understand their role, and they are reshaping our country, our cities, and our world. In science, technology, design, manufacturing, and resource development, entrepreneurs are a key resource that has a direct impact on GDP. The challenge to realizing entrepreneurial potential and impact is government. It has a habit of standing in the way, especially during the startup stage. Rules, regulations, and taxes handcuff entrepreneurs' desire to create new markets and businesses. Governments love to talk about the value of small business and then collectively introduce overly burdensome processes that prevent experimentation and reduce risk tolerances because there's no wiggle room left. Add in the cost of living, and Vancouver is a difficult place to launch an innovation company. We invited venture capitalist Sean Bromley to join us for a conversation that matters about the remarkable potential that is waiting to be unleashed in Vancouver if only the business development climate was warmer.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we're living in a time of interesting challenges and opportunities for businesses. Businesses that can shape the way we live, that can create employment, and create a better future for people. Technology also becomes like a great leveling, a leveler. It means that there's access to opportunity for everyone. It's as though we all understand that, but let's talk about, are we an innovative city? Are we an innovative country? Are we moving in the right direction? And then what are we doing to help that, or are we hindering it?
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of great points in there. And to start out on kind of the first topic you touched on, are we an innovative city? I think we're certainly on our way to getting there. We've had a number of large companies from the startup sector, whether that's Hootsuite or Vigilon that recently got bought out. You've had a number of homegrown successes. And we have
Plenty of Fish is one, isn't
Plenty
it?
of Fish as well.
Yeah.
Plenty of Fish as well. And that's an even more remarkable story because they didn't raise any outside capital. That was truly an organic, one shareholder, grew the entire company, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that, and a profitable company at that, that got bought out. But on the other hand, if you look at even Toronto or, of course, down south in Silicon Valley, a lot more innovation is developed there, and they're light years ahead of us. It's very difficult in this city, particularly to raise capital for early stage companies as well, especially compared to the United States of America.
So is that because we're risk adverse?
Yeah, I think it's for a number of reasons. So Silicon Valley obviously has kind of a historic situation where they started there with the HPs of the world. And in any city, what generally happens is as you have a successful company come out, like a Plenty of Fish, then that entrepreneur makes money in a sector that he understands, and they kind of feed it back into the economy.
But one of the other things that we understand about Silicon Valley, for instance, is you go back to the late 1950s, early 1960s, and the government of California recognized that they were going to create that environment that ultimately became, and they supported it. They put special programs in place. This is going back to the 1960s. We weren't doing any of that, and I don't even know that we're doing it yet. We start talking about the super clusters, but who is that actually benefiting?
Absolutely. I mean, the BC government said they're going to start a $100 million venture capital fund. I don't know exactly where that's at. I don't know any companies that have been funded from it. And having government support for these companies, as you mentioned, is incredibly essential. There isn't really a city that I can think of that hasn't had support from their government that has become an innovative hub of the world.
Right.
What you need to have is protections in place, whether that's property rights or Silicon Valley, in California in particular, actually has legislation that makes it easy for startups to work with lawyers to raise capital. So they were,
and there's a tax structure in place as well that is beneficial to them.
Absolutely.
It's as though it understands and anticipates the needs of startup companies.
Yeah, totally. I mean, these are risky investments, and so the investor needs to have some sort of incentive there as well, and then the entrepreneur needs to be able to start up cheaply, because, of course, as we know, with innovation, a lot of these things don't actually work out in the end, and most innovation is actually driven by a few people or a few companies that have a disproportionate effect on everything else.
As you say that, I think about Norm Foster, who created Pivotal.
Yeah.
So Pivotal, I mean, the name is representative of the fact that they were creating an entirely different product concept and went, oh, this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
They had some cash. They still had cash from their investors. And they went, well, we're not going to run it into the ground. So they pivoted and became what they are now. But and that shows that there's a tremendous amount of entrepreneurial spirit, inventive nature, intelligence at work, but they did it on their own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like there was no government support helping them.
Yeah, 100%. TO Networks is actually another example of that. They pivoted 3 times until they got bought out by PayPal a year or two ago for $300 million. And that was all homegrown investor money, not an incredible amount of government help there. And so, and then to touch on your point of, are we helping to harvest that? It seems to me like there's a branding that we're trying to help, but in practice and actuality, we aren't really doing it. And so what I mean by
please explain.
So what I mean by that, about 2 years ago, we started having the BC Tech Summit. There's a lot of conferences here, a lot of kind of hoopla about all these things that we're doing. But then when it kind of gets down to dollars and cents, like how many innovative companies are actually coming out of Vancouver? We mentioned a couple, and they all started in the past 15 years. Like that's a long period of time to have kind of 3, 4, 5 large companies come out. And so now it's very politically popular to talk about helping startups because it's a very sexy space. Everybody sees Uber reaching $125 billion valuation. Everybody gets very excited about it. But then at the end of the day, we're not creating tax incentive structures that are helping a lot of these companies out. We're not creating a lot of environments where it's easy for these companies to start up. It's still very expensive. They have a lot of lawyer fees that they have to go through. There's a lot of, in my opinion, overly burdensome investor regulations. So what we've seen happen is 15 years ago in like the dot-com bubble, or I guess 20 years ago in the dot-com kind of bubble, all of that was in the public sector. So all publicly traded stock companies, and anybody could participate in that. So you had Netflix go public, you had Amazon go public. Amazon, the biggest company in the world now, and anybody could have participated in that ride.
Yes.
Now, with overly burdensome regulation in these companies, they can't go public earlier, so they're staying private forever. There's also low interest rates, which means you have a lot of venture capital because pension funds need to get a yield somewhere. And so what that effectively means is you have the rich and very large institutions being able to invest in these types of companies, but the average person cannot invest in these types of companies because they're not accredited investors or they don't have enough capital. And so the innovative companies are actually locked away from the average investor, whereas that's not something that happened 20 years ago. And so all of that innovation that's driven only goes to kind of a select few people.
Got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
Okay, that's unfair. Now, mind you, I wasn't investing in Amazon either. I remember I had an opportunity to invest in Microsoft when it was just going to go, really? I don't know. So
there you go. Another
Yeah.
great example as well. Microsoft went public at probably $1 billion valuation.
Yeah, and that was, 88, 89, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And, went, okay, but I didn't have the money and I didn't have the foresight to jump on it.
Yeah.
But
hindsight investing is always easy.
Right. That's a little bit off topic here, but when I look at, so we want to foster that here in Vancouver. There is an awful lot of talk about it.
Yeah.
But how antithetical is it to have that kind of discussion when we go, there's these ride-sharing apps that are available virtually everywhere else in the world, but not here. How can we call ourselves an innovation city if we can't embrace the kind of technology the consumers are asking for.
Yeah, and so I mean that is a perfect and an excellent example. So here we have it where we're trying to brand ourselves as this startup hub of North America, Silicon Valley North, whatever you want to call it.
Center of excellence.
Yeah, center of excellence, all these types of things. And then basically the number one startup in the world can't operate here because of overly burdened legislations, and I'm sure we can agree political issues that are happening.
Well, Airbnb is another example.
Airbnb.
It doesn't fit in with a housing policy that the local government wants,
Yeah.
so they go, no, you can't use it.
Yeah.
And yet a whole bunch of people were going, but this is giving me supplemental income in a market where I need supplemental
Yeah,
income.
when you can't afford your house.
Yeah.
So you either say that, oh, well, you're getting income, so it drives up housing prices. But it's like, hey, if I'm gone, I'm on the road or I'm traveling or whatever, and I can rent my place out so that I can help afford a house in the middle of a housing crisis, I don't see why you'd ever stop doing that. It doesn't actually make any sense.
Okay, so enough complaining about that. Let's talk about what some of the issues are, though, that come up. And that is, so can these companies, can we give them free rein to do these things without having them trample on citizens' rights? You know, we take a look at some of the issues around privacy associated with Facebook and Google and a variety of other big apps that are data scrapers and gatherers. Can entrepreneurs, can we create that environment that will allow them to develop these innovative products and still respect their customers and users?
Yeah, so that's a great point. It's a really nuanced argument, I think, and it's a real balancing act. So one is an issue of kind of scalability and what I'd call systemic risk. So with Facebook, for instance, when it started, it was at Harvard University. And so you start at Harvard.
When Mark Zuckerberg was there. Right?
Yeah. So he was at Harvard. He started it. I'm sure we've all seen the movie. He started at Harvard. And if he had privacy issues at Harvard, that wouldn't really be so much of a problem. And then he expanded to the other Ivy League schools and expanded to universities, and then it kind of blew up from there. But so what I'm kind of getting at is it's an issue of scaling. So when you're a small company and you make mistakes, it doesn't harm too many people.
Right.
And so the balancing act there is there's a chance you're going to create something that impacts everybody like Facebook. And so when you're starting out, you need to allow these companies to do that, or Uber as well, right? When Uber started out, it just kind of used the motto, move fast and break things, which is kind of the credo.
Was their motto.
Yeah, move fast and break things. Who cares about the regulation?
As long as I'm not a passenger in their car.
Exactly. Airbnb was kind of a similar thing. And so if we found out very early that Uber only hired bad drivers, we'd put a stop to that. Or Facebook was misusing data when it's a very small company, you put a stop to it. But the impact isn't too big. But if you wait for a long time, then you can get into issues. And so what fundamentally I think you have to do is allow early companies to basically move fast and break things, because the risk isn't too big, because you can't actually harm that many people. It's very localized. But when companies get a lot larger, then you have to put in a lot more regulation around them, because now there's a systemic risk that they have, whether that is Facebook with data breaches, or even a more traditional company like BP with their oil spill. When you're drilling your first hole for oil, the risk to the environment is very big. When you're one of the largest oil companies in the world, your risk becomes very big.
This is our second break. We'll be back in a moment.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
Going back to my original question, I sort of hear you say, well, yes, we can. Entrepreneurs can change the world, and we have to give them kind of free rein to a point. It is a double-edged sword in some ways, isn't it?
100% it is.
You know,
it's not an easy answer.
No,
and it's not an easy policy.
But is it within the capacity of entrepreneurs to be able to respect all of that, or do they get driven by just the desire to create this thing and with dollar signs in their eyes?
I mean, I think that's an interesting question. From the entrepreneur standpoint, generally speaking, they're motivated by some desire to impact the world. It's not just they see a bunch of dollar signs. They want to do something to help people. And so
but that's a new concept. You go back. I remember when I was first in school studying, the art of advertising. And I was told by the instructor, the general manager or the CEO of General Motors stood up and said, a lot of people think our job is to make cars. It's not.
Our job is to make money. And that was the mantra then.
That's true, yeah.
But it's not anymore, is it? If we want to create the kinds of corporations that are going to be sustainable in the future, I think the workforce and society as a whole is saying, no, you have to be creating something of value.
Yeah, 100%. And part of that is also for the entrepreneur. So from the entrepreneur standpoint, there's generally speaking, no way that money is going to be enough of a motivator for them to take this massive risk that they're doing. So from an intrinsic standpoint, they really have to believe in what they're doing, because there's no way they're going to work 100 hours a week for 10 years to try to see the light at the end of the tunnel. If it's just for a dollar sign, they can probably go, I'll get that elsewhere with an easier job. So it's often from a motivated standpoint about trying to do something. And of course, it has to make money at the end of the day. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable. It's like some sort of Ponzi scheme. I can make a business that collects quarters and sells for nickels, but at the end of the day, I'd run out of money.
So one of the roles of government, as you pointed out, is to be a little bit of an oversight.
Yeah.
Especially when you get to a certain point. Government has to find that delicate balance between, okay, I'm going to let you run here, but then I'm going to start to rein you in a little bit once you get to a certain size. It's in this size here. Angus Reid once pointed out in a book that he wrote, Everything I Learned About Business I Learned from a Canadian.
Yeah.
Fascinating book.
I'll have to read it.
And he talks about the level of innovation that we have here, but how difficult it is to grow. So what becomes the role of government in being able to create the kind of environment that says, okay, I understand the struggles of small business, and I also understand how what I need to do to keep you motivated as you grow.
Yeah.
What are some of those key elements?
That's a good question. I think to start out, you need to have a regulatory environment that makes it easy to start the business. Step one, obviously. So you need to be able to start the business easily. You need to be able to access capital easily. And so whether that is being able to have, like in California, you have basically a one-page term sheet that allows you to raise money. In Canada, it's a 30-page subscription document. It's very difficult.
It's onerous and becomes expensive.
It's onerous. It's expensive.
You need help.
You almost need to raise.
Help.
Yeah, you almost need to raise money just to raise money. It's then you have to pay for corporations and all these things, and it gets burdensome. And then as you develop, one thing that other countries do is they help to foster international capital as well. So if you look at an example, like Singapore is kind of a weird example, because on one hand, it went from basically a third world country to one of the highest per capita GDP places in about 25 years.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it also gets a lot of criticism for being a nanny state. And so it's kind of this balancing act. I think the nanny state is just a factor of its history, and it had to basically battle a communist to exist.
Right.
But what it did was bring in a lot of multinational companies and a lot of foreign investment. And so they would have people go out to other countries and say, hey, we're a great place to invest in. Give us money, give our companies money. And what that does is it puts you on the map, because a lot of people, Canada's a small place.
Yes.
Right? You got 30 some million people. It'd basically be the same as asking a Canadian if they invest in like Norway. Like, probably not. But if Norway delegations come here and you start to support that, then it becomes a lot more of an obvious thing to do. And it helps to bring in more capital, because Canada, with its limited population, has limited capital as well.
Is the government doing that?
The government does
from
it.
your evidence, because I'm sure that there are people who say, we run trade missions all the time.
All the time, yeah. They do it to a degree, but I don't know how actually successful that they've been in it. And part of that could be where they're focusing on. So if you're focusing on Silicon Valley, they're probably not going to do it. There's enough companies, there's enough capital there, they're fixed. So part of that is about where you're going to be accessing capital. And then part of that as well is bringing in, and actually the government's probably done a reasonable job of it, bringing in companies like Amazon and larger companies here. Because what that does is, after a while, those senior level employees, they make a decent clip of cash. And after a while, they don't want to work for Amazon anymore. They want to start their own company. And they actually have funding and they have the skill set to be able to do that. And it kind of creates this trickle down that helps.
Well, and hopefully they'll want to stay here.
And hopefully they'll want to stay here, which is a risk as well.
Well, sure, because the cost of bringing in staff and for your own startup in a place like Vancouver is exceptionally high.
It's exceptionally high. You have high taxes, you have a very high standard of cost of living. You also have a high standard of living, but the cost is very high. Right. And you have a currency that, if you're trying to recruit from America, the currency doesn't really work very well.
Third and final break. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
Let's wrap this up by saying, what do you think the future of innovation is in Canada and in Vancouver in particular under the current regulatory regime?
I'm optimistic. I think I have to be.
Yes.
I think what we'll see is successful companies have the ear of the government, which is good. But also there's the consumer side of this. So companies like Uber, consumers get fed up enough and they do vote with their votes, right? So they will eventually boot out people. So if you're looking at the future of the city and the city of the future, that's kind of a longer time frame where these issues actually do rack up and eventually you have a governmental change in favor of what the consumers want. And when the consumer demand for something is so high, it does change.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of that is successful companies, the government does ask them, what can I do to help? Whether they actually implement it's different, but they certainly do ask. And so as we have more successful companies, they will be asking, what can we do to help? And hopefully these companies are saying, we need easier access to capital. We need easier startup costs. We need more freedom to be able to develop innovation without any sort of political involvement like you have with a company like Uber or Airbnb, where they have political issues basically hindering their ability to perform.
I'm beginning to think that a small business person or an entrepreneur is the kind of person who figures a way of like living within the rules. I don't think most people want to break the rules, but they find another way of like realigning the blocks to make it work. Because when you look at it the way that it's structured, you go, well, why would I bother?
Small businesses are the number one employer in North America. And these are often the people that are forgotten. I mean, we spent a lot of the time kind of chatting about very innovative companies and startups, but a lot of small businesses, they're not taking on outside capital. They're homegrown. They're employing 5, 10 people, and those are actually the guys from an employment standard that matter quite a bit because they're the ones supplying all the jobs. They're paying the majority of taxes, and they're high taxes that they have to pay.
Right.
And they have very stringent hiring policies, firing policies. It's not easy for them to grow and shrink with the whims of the economy, which is something that you actually have to be able to do, regulation.
I know. I think the regulations have actually made it very difficult for a small business person to say, I'm going to hire someone. Who wins here? I think nobody. People aren't getting hired, businesses aren't growing, opportunities go missing. And we're forcing more and more people out into like a gig economy when we don't need to do that, because the regulations of the government are putting so many restrictions on small business. It's as though they don't understand what it takes to run a small business.
Yeah, well, I mean, they've never run one before, so they think from this top-down side where they're thinking, oh, well, I know what's best for you because of whatever I studied and because I'm a politician. But at the end of the day, they've never taken those risks before. They don't have any skin in the game where they're actually running these companies and going, hey, you know what? It's kind of hard to hire somebody sometimes. Then if I fire them, I'm giving them exit interviews. I have to document all this stuff about what they did wrong. I can't just say, hey, I can't afford it anymore. You're gone. It's worse on both ends. One, you have a limitation on economic growth. And then two, the people you're trying to help are actually pushed out and then they lose benefits.
But we remain hopeful. We remain hopeful. Thank you very much for coming in and sharing ideas.
It's a pleasure.
I don't know that we solved anything here, but we're
one day at a time.
We're putting it out there for discussion.